Here we go. Happy New Year. You were fine until right now.
That could not have worked out to be more hilarious timing.
You were fine until really...
Nothing was happening, and then all of a sudden, nothing was happening, and it was happening in my throat.
Oh, lungs.
Yeah. So, COVID notwithstanding, doing okay, I guess.
Do you have it?
I got tested for it yesterday.
Ooh.
And there's definitely something happening in our house, and so we don't know, but we'll find out, I guess. My wife's getting tested today.
Lord have mercy.
Maybe we'll be some of the lucky millions. One of the lucky millions.
Yeah, at this point, this is sadly not very rare.
No, it's a thing now.
Yeah. Isn't it great that COVID went away after the election? Really glad.
Yeah,
really glad that
I know.
happened.
For a little while, Arizona was the hot spot in the world.
In the world?
We are number one in the world. Yes,
man.
It was an exciting moment. It passed. That moment went away, but
that's good.
It was cool.
I mean, you take the awards that you can get.
I took partial responsibility for it for sure. I was like, I definitely want to ride this win as far as I can.
Did you have a banner, a decal set up, perhaps?
Yes. Arizona number one.
a big foam hand.
Yes. I put a "We Did It" sticker on the back of my car.
Nice. Maybe some empty cans tied with string to the bumper, just because.
Yes. Wrote on paper, like chalk, ink, whatever that stuff is. The marker, window marker.
Oh yeah.
Just
I don't
infected.
Know. I don't know. Just. I mean, it's so absurd, right? It's so absurd that here we are in January 2021, still dealing with this thing that you just have to laugh. It's so absurd.
It's everywhere. I remember like when in the
not in
beginning
Australia or New Zealand or whatever.
Yeah, small islands. Lucky. I remember when the whole thing was starting, like, they're saying like it'll burn up by April, like with the warmer weather, and like, August at the latest, and now it's like, oh nope, here we go still.
Yeah.
And now it's like when I got out of my car to come into my house yesterday, I put my mask on.
To come into your house?
Into my own house. I was like just getting out of the car, I put on my mask without even thinking about it. Yeah. And like I was like, oh, I lived during a pandemic. This is
it's become muscle memory.
Hello, children. Come give father a 6-foot air hug. Father!
Sorry, I can't hear you from that far away.
Yeah.
I said, Papa. What a world. Yeah.
Yeah.
2020, true to its name, is starting up right where 2020 left off.
Indeed. Indeed. Thanks, January 6th. I saw a thing, maybe you even sent it to me, but it was hilarious. A little snapshot or something from the internet where somebody said, I would like to cancel my subscription to 2021. I tried the 7-day trial period and I did not like it.
Yes, seriously. Sadly, the office has not been responsive to those customer complaints. So I think we're all stuck here.
I think we're all stuck in 2021. I suggested from the very beginning that maybe we should just like start 2020 over and let it roll over until everything was done and back to kind of like somewhat steady. And then we could start 2021. Then like we could just have like the 2nd January 2020. Yeah. And then once like everything's fine, it's like, we'll just pick right up and be like, oh, it's May 2021 now. We skipped the first 6 months of 2021 to arrive at this perfect year.
I will only be okay with that if we're allowed to refer to each of those second do-overs as part due.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, obviously.
Because I think it's classy.
Yeah, I think it's actually a 20 duo.
Oh, the
2020. Do the do.
I like that. There's so many
Yeah,
possibilities.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I wish people would listen to my ideas more.
That's really the one thing that this world needs.
Mm-hmm.
If Christian had autocratic powers,
Yeah,
just to be able to sort of control space and time and the designation thereof, we'd be fine.
yeah. I think people should vote for me for supreme ruler. Like, I think that that's like the thing that I've been
That's not how
trying to
that
say
works.
this whole time. You know,
You don't
like,
vote for a supreme ruler.
well, in my world, you do. And if you don't vote for me, then you don't get to be a part of my country.
Oh, that's how it works.
Yeah.
I love that you're this hypothetical country that you've it's built on a strong foundation of petulance.
Yes,
Oh, you didn't
yes.
vote for me, so there.
You don't get to play with my Xbox.
That's probably the most realistic thing about your hypothetical country.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There's one Xbox, and it's in my house, and my neighbors are the only other people who are part of my country, and they can go home if they don't like it.
Weirdly autocratic, also respects personal choice.
Definitely boundaries.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a boundaried authoritarianism.
Limited constitutional authoritarianism, you might say.
Yeah.
What the British monarchy is to monarchy, this is to despotism.
You know, it's not a fan of constitutional authoritarianism.
Reality.
2021 is not a fan.
Oh man. So yeah. I have to mention something, because this has become kind of like a pastime of mine over the course of the last 7 days in particular, because we're doing this live on the 13th. And of course, as we know here in the States, if you're watching internationally, last Wednesday on the 6th, on Epiphany, no less, right? We had what I will very charitably and inaccurately refer to as a kerfuffle in our nation's capital.
I don't think it's the technical term, but I think it's pretty close.
For insurrection? No, violent insurrection. Yeah. I mean, because you just have to chuckle at some point, because it's so ridiculous, right? Like, people stormed the Capitol armed with like guns and zip ties and Civil War sort of t-shirts, and we're clearly up to no good. And which was crazy, right? Like, you think about how this relates to back in the old days, right? If you were a peasant in the Roman emperor, right? Somebody on a horse rides up at some point and he's like, "Hey, Constantinople fell." Ain't that news? Whereas now, like, you watched it live, like this weird feeling of like helplessness and anxiety and rage at all of the lies that led up to this moment. So it's become kind of a little pastime of mine over the last week to just try to fact check the really random, inaccurate things that some of my friends on social media post, because like, here's the other thing that was crazy about watching this unfold, right? You watched lies unfold at the same time. Like, as people who were very clearly on one side of the political spectrum were doing this thing, the lie started going that actually it was people on the other side of this political spectrum who were like doing this thing, right? And you see these lies in your social media timeline spreading in real life and people amplifying them, and it's like, ain't that something? What a world we live in, where lies are so easily consumable and like a virus, you might say, so easily shareable.
Yes.
What a
world. You don't even need to be within 6 feet of one another to do that. You can actually be 6,000 miles away from one another and still spread lies.
Yes, the cough has a...
I mean, it's interesting, right? We even talk about that, like when something goes viral. It's like, because it's like blah, 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 replicating itself in this like, really, really crazy way. But yeah, no, I'm with you, man. It was a really, it's because it's interesting, you watch it with kind of like helplessness, dread, rage, but there was also kind of like a little part of me that was like, didn't we kind of see? Am I the only one that saw this coming? Like, that this is where this was headed. Like, this is the logical conclusion of everything that's been going on.
No, I'm pretty sure the FBI and others, like, there were hearings like in Washington D.C. in months past that warned of things like this, which is kind of crazy, right? but yeah, the level of instability, the level of all of these things just like percolating to the surface,
Yeah.
the level of distrust
Mhm.
that exists amongst Americans, right? The level of trust of badly cropped, unsourced memes that people are sort of taking it as news, right? The level of bending over backwards that we're doing to justify, I mean, attempted murder in some cases. Because like when people are holding plastic zip ties in their hands, right? And they're chanting, hang Mike Pence, right?
And they
And they have
also
a,
put up like a gallows.
yes. Like, what do you think would have happened had they actually like confronted Mike Pence or senators or congressmen or whatever it is? Like, this was not a protest.
No,
This was not a
this was
protest.
this is a public execution.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
people did die in the midst of it,
Yep.
right? Which was kind of the point, if you were to believe the rhetoric. And
Yeah.
you know, what's that famous line? You have to believe people when they tell you like what they're all about. Yeah, this is just I don't think there's any epiphany is a day of revelation, right? I think our eyes were certainly opened to something that is percolating in our collective heart and consciousness on that day,
Yeah.
right? And it's not good.
Nope. And it's not going to go away just like that. You know, things like this have a way of galvanizing folks too. To be like, oh, look, they did it. The problem was they didn't do it hard enough. And
Yeah.
so like, who knows? I mean, who knows what's going to happen, but it's difficult and sickening. And I think it's a reminder to us to be on, you know, and honestly, what's pretty terrifying too, is that the amount of Christian imagery that was associated with it too, like people carrying crosses, holding signs saying Jesus saves. I mean, they were blasting like, you know, contemporary Christian music, and they were carrying crosses, and like this was clearly like a tied in with like some version of what people think is Christianity. Like there's clearly some sort of religious component to this, something that was happening there. And you know, what's wild to me is that like had it been a bunch of Muslims doing it, like it would have for sure been labeled as like, you know, religious extremism. But because it was a bunch of white Christian men, like it was like, you know, definitely overlooked. That part of it was overlooked anyway, and that's nerve-wracking. But I think that like part of what we need to also realize is that like these people who are out there with the crosses and Jesus saves signs and all of that, like these aren't just like, you know, fundamentalists in like the Protestant world. Like there are people who are coming into our church with these ideas, and they're slippery and they're dangerous, and we need to be on guard. We need to be on guard in the Orthodox Church, especially, I think, because we do have such a strong traditionalism kind of thing going on, right? Like we love the old way. We kind of would be like make Orthodoxy Byzantine again if we could.
Yeah.
And I do think that the kind of like mythic past narratives that people cling to, they find a foothold in Orthodoxy, right? Like that, like, and we can easily see like the rhetoric of these dangerous groups pulling Orthodox Christians toward that way of thinking, and kind of baptizing it or shrouding it in the language of Orthodox tradition. So
Yeah.
I do think we need to be on guard too. Like that's
Yeah.
a scary and important part of this too.
Because this is something we've talked about a little bit before. Like it's possible to have Christless orthodoxy, right?
Yes.
Like there's a difference between Orthodox Christianity and orthodoxy, right? And I think you see this in particular online, where the wrong kinds of voices sometimes get amplified. Like somebody who would never, ever in a million years have the blessing to offer a sermon, for instance, gets to sort of like spout all sorts of nonsense online. And like there's a difference between seeking the Lord, right, in the context of his church, right? Because like there's people who like that's why they become Orthodox Christians, versus I have interactions sometimes with people and it's like, you're here because you think women should wear headscarves all the time, right? Or some other kind of like weird cultural superficial thing, right? Like it's funny to me that, and this is, I think Orthodox Christians in particular, we have to deal with this too, right? Partly because we have this traditional streak that's baked into what we're doing, partly because, to be totally honest, right, in many corners, the church has been kind of a Trojan horse for old world culture, right? Like I grew up in the church, which was kind of a vehicle for Greek culture, or maybe you grew up in a church which was a vehicle for Russian culture, right? And that's maybe not toxic, it's bad, right? But what happens now if like American culture, with all the sort of extremism that it has, is just trying to co-opt the church as a Trojan horse for itself, right? Like, what's the difference between old world Greek culture and woke American culture, right? On the one hand, or like toxic authoritarian American culture, right? Something using the superficiality of the church, but actually like, right, that's what it's really about. That's orthodoxy.
Like it's a storefront. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's like this. It's got the drapings of Orthodox Christianity, but you know, you lift the veil, and it's like it's clearly this like the trappings of, just very, very, very dangerous political rhetoric and very dangerous, violent tendencies. You know, it's. I mean, it's just hard to imagine Jesus marching on Washington like that.
Yeah, well, with pitchforks in hand and zip ties in tow, yes.
Get Mike Pence, hang him.
And that's worth remembering, right? Like, who are we actually for? Like an image that's been in my mind, especially as we've seen all of this sort of stuff happen, right? It's kind of the anti-be the bee mentality. Like the sort of the image that's really been like a guiding force for a lot of our work is like, remember who we're for. Like, we're looking for God. We're trying to find God here and now in the face of the neighbor, right? We're trying to find his guiding hand in every moment of our lives. We're focused on what we're for. And I think in contrast, somebody like Saruman, for instance, right, in The Lord of the Rings, who got so obsessed with the ways of the Dark One that he ended up following the Dark One. Right? Like we're so obsessed with the illusion of what the imagined left is capable of, or the imagined right is capable of, that like literally people were beaten to death at the Capitol. But the boogeyman in our minds is so scary that we're willing to actually bend over backwards and engage in mental gymnastics to explain something objectively terrible away. Right? Like, because we're all like these crazy Sarumans who focused on the darkness so much that it's corrupted us. Like, the point is to be the beat, like to focus on, to look for God, not to obsess over the darkness, because the darkness makes its way in, man. The darkness really makes its way in.
You know, part of like, I don't know if we've ever talked about this. I'm sure we have, but when, at least this is something I've heard. I can't confirm or deny that this is true because I don't know a lot of things, but I do know some things. So, like bank tellers, when they're being taught how to identify counterfeit money, the way that the way that they do that is they're given real money, and they're told to spend time with it, memorize it, how it feels, how it smells. It's like the way that it kind of like rubs in your hands, and like just the overall feel of it, and to really be able to identify real money, so that when someone hands you anything that's not real money, you go like, this isn't real money. And I think that to me is why we are encouraged like so much to like, you know, what St. Paul says, right? Like, whatever is pure, whatever is good, whatever is lovely, all of this kind of stuff. Like, think on these things, because then we'll all of a sudden be like, something sort of smells fishy, you know? And even if we can't identify what it is, we go like, no, no, I don't think that's right. It just doesn't feel right. Like
that's not myrrh. Something smells off.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to make a Proposition 207 joke here. Anyway, that's what it was in Arizona, the marijuana one, but I couldn't think of it quick enough. Insert obligatory Prop 207 marijuana being legalized joke.
A for effort. But
I tried.
No, you tried. And I think you raised a really good point, right? There is one Christ. In the same way that there's like one, this is the real currency. Like, there is one true Christ. The closer we grow to him, the more we know who he is, the more we can be aware of the imposters and like people on, right? Like Saint Silouan will tell us, right, that you know the presence of the Holy Spirit because your heart is large enough to encompass the entire world. Mm-hmm. When you're out there like saying, hang so-and-so and let's, you know, it's just not. Ban the fill in the blanks. Yeah.
if you're banning anybody from anything, it's like,
Yeah. Or string them up
probably-
outside on the makeshift gallows that you've created, right? It's just like, it's not right.
yeah,
You know, and here's the
Patriots, Steve.
what, well, here's the thing, right? That we all as Americans have to sort of deal with, right? Because this isn't about like pointing fingers at anybody. Like, to the extent that we are all Americans and we are all part of the national conversation that kind of culminated in that moment, like, this should be an opportunity for us to realize, like, what are the ways that I have enraged my neighbor to the point that he's done that? Like, what are the things that I have said and done that have contributed to this toxicity? Like, it's not a moment for blame, right? I think it happened on Epiphany for a reason. And like, because we can also like look at that and the darkness as a way to, again, distract from the brokenness within us, right? That becomes a different way to focus on the darkness. Yeah. Like, this is a moment for repentance. This is a moment for, but also accountability, because like, people who did that, man, like, something's got to happen. You don't get to heal by pretending nothing happened. That's toxic.
Yeah, agreed.
Anyway,
2020 Reloaded.
Yeah, the legend continues.
Also, they're coming out with the Matrix 4, so that's a thing that's happening. Thank you, whatever this world is.
This is the darkest timeline.
That's what I was going to say. I feel like I stepped into the darkest timeline. Like, what is happening? And the Matrix 4 thing is completely baffling to me, because pretty sure the two main characters died in Matrix 3, didn't they? And yet somehow...
Hot.
I don't know what's happening.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll cross the Matrix 4 bridge when we get there.
I don't want to. It's going to be like Indiana Jones 4, which is a movie that was made but doesn't really exist.
That never happened.
Yeah. We have to talk about it, Steve. We have to talk about it.
Some things are best ignored.
It's so funny, because when that movie came out, that was like the beginning of like this kind of like relaunching the past kind of stuff that's been happening. You know, everyone was like, oh, let's bring back Indiana Jones. And like, it hasn't stopped since then. And none of them has been good. Mm-hmm. With the exception of Cobra Kai. Cobra Kai has been, I think, is different, because it's not trying to just like relaunch the past. It's like, let's do something different and be like, remember those other movies? They were kind of messed up. And like,
yeah, let's deal with that today.
Yeah, people who are trying to learn from things, not co-opting the past and, you know, retconning different things and all of that. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Ugh. But you know what isn't something from the past that we're going to be talking about today?
A new release from Pixar?
That's right.
Seamless transition, my friend. Seamless transition. What are we doing today on now that we get to the joy of Pop Culture Coffee Hour?
Yeah. So the joy of Pop Culture Coffee Hour. Today we are going to be talking about Disney Pixar's new feature-length film, Soul, playing for free on Disney Plus for $6.99 a month,
minus what you're paying for the monthly subscription. But at least they didn't pull a Mulan, right? At least they didn't do that. Like, for $20, you can watch this at home.
Yeah, never go full Mulan, guys.
No.
Just wait it out. Wait it out.
Because now you can watch Mulan for $6.95 a month, which you're already paying.
Yeah. And you know what I still haven't done to this day?
What?
Watched Mulan.
Same here.
So
I haven't watched the original either. I never watched the cartoon.
Well, there you go. Do you not believe in strong female leadership, Steve?
No.
Since how long have you not believed in strong female leadership?
Don't you pull that on me. You sneaky old so-and-so. For as long as I can remember.
Yeah. That's like there's this, you know, the setup question of like, have you stopped kicking your dog? And it's like, yes. No.
Wait a minute.
Either way, I'm a dog kicker. Yeah, so you are a dog kicker.
I rest my case. But anyway, we're doing Soul. Soul is very new. Soul came out back in December, I think,
Christmas
right?
Day.
It's just Christmas Day. That's right. So it's very, very new. Some of you may not have seen it, in which case you might want to pause this, come back after you've watched it. But in any event, as is traditional on Pop Culture Coffee Hour, in order to make you aware of the spoilers that are coming your way, I must ask for the release of the spoiler porg. You've been
There he
porged.
is.
All right.
Porging you with his warnings.
We're in spoiler territory now, folks.
We are. So, Steve, why don't you go ahead and start us off, as you do every week, by ignoring the question that I'm going to ask you and answering a different question, but then getting to
I'm
the question
opposed to
that I
strong
asked you
female
initially.
leadership because...
Yes. Steve, will you tell us what Soul is all about?
Yes. So, Soul is a movie that follows Joe Gardner, who's a middle school music teacher. He's long wanted to become a professional musician. He finally gets his chance to play with a big name, and he's so distracted that he falls into an open manhole and dies. And his soul is on this conveyor belt. He's going to go to the great beyond. He actually figures out a way to get off this conveyor belt. He goes to the great before. The great before is where souls, whatever, heresy, right? Souls, before they're sent to Earth, they live there. They're assigned to mentors who kind of train them, give them this spark, which is what, when they're ready to go to Earth, he kind of hides. He pretends that he's this mentor. He is assigned to 22, who is, I guess, the 22nd soul that was ever created, more than 108 billion souls ago, right? 22 was created a long time ago, but has never gone to Earth because she's afraid, basically. And so they get into a bunch of like adventures. They do end up accidentally getting sent back to Earth, but 22 goes into Joe's body. Joe falls into a cat. They have these adventures, right? They're trying to sort of not embarrass Joe so he doesn't lose this chance to play with this wonderful musician. But 22 has a little bit of an epiphany, and she realizes she likes Earth more than she realized, and she refuses to give the body back to Joe. They end up getting caught by one of the accountants, Terry, one of the two-dimensional accountants, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a little bit.
Why was he called Terry, but the rest of them were called Jerry? What did that ever get explained?
No, they rhyme. That's.
But they were all like Jerry. Hey, Jerry. Hi, Jerry. What's up, Jerry?
Yeah, because Jerry, I guess, was one thing,
was Terry.
And Terry was something else. Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't know. I don't fully get it. But they go back into the great beyond. 22 actually becomes a lost soul as a result of this experience, because some bad interactions with Joe, which were very kind of sad. Joe goes back into his body. He plays on stage. He lives up to his purpose, and he realizes that he's not actually as fulfilled by his purpose as he thought. So then he figures out a way to go back to the great beyond. He rescues 22, and he has this epiphany because he realizes that life isn't about this grand purpose or doing something. It's about regular old living. And he actually is willing to give up his life to go and rescue 22. He does rescue 22, who then goes and starts her life on the Earth, and he gets another shot at life. And he says that this time he's going to live. He's going to truly live every moment. And it's kind of a sweet little ending of just him walking onto his front porch, getting ready to start a new day. That's it. Did I miss anything?
No, nailed it.
What'd you think?
Well, I liked it. It was definitely, Pixar's, I think, trippiest film that they've ever made. There were a couple moments when I'm like, I think I'm scared right now. And just like different things happening, especially because he was falling through the dimensions and all of that kind of stuff. I was like, I don't like, is this going to be the whole thing? I don't want this. But yeah, I mean, here's what I'll say. Not that this is the gauge of all things Pixar, but this is the only Pixar movie that did not make me cry that I've seen. It's the only one, the only Pixar movie that did not make me cry. So I don't know how good it really can be if it's not making me cry. And everything makes me cry. So like,
can confirm.
All things make me cry. And I mean, I liked it, and I thought like it was definitely I think a helpful kind of reorientation. I think because we get so caught up kind of in, and we'll talk about like age of authenticity stuff and like that there's this particular way to kind of like live into our own humanity. And I think that this movie in particular was like a really interesting exploration of that concept. But I think it felt more like an exploration of a concept than kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? A unveiling of the human heart. You know what I mean? Like I feel like a lot of Pixar's other movies, they kind of like peel back the layers of the heart. And this one I felt kind of like opened up parts of the mind. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? And I think
Yeah.
that's why it didn't make me cry. It didn't hit me in the heart. It hit me in the head. I
So
don't know.
thinking about that from a different angle, I was talking about this with a friend of mine, and her observation about the movie was like, would a little kid enjoy this movie?
Right. That was how I felt too, watching it with my children.
Yeah.
Like, sorry guys, I don't.
Yeah. So that's interesting, right? Because I think, yeah, it was definitely a more grown up movie. I mean, it dealt with mature themes, but also like Coco dealt with death, right? But it kind of dealt with it in a different way. So I say that, not that that's bad. I do think it's different. I do think it's a little bit more cerebral than kind of heart, like you said. That said, I thought the design of this movie was wonderful.
Oh my gosh.
I thought it was really cool that, because again, the animation in this is continues to progress. I mean, the way that they captured Joe playing the piano. One of my favorite moments was the woman who's in charge of the band playing the saxophone. You see her fingers on the keys. You hear the click of the keys. Like the realism of it was really stunning. And yet you had these two-dimensional characters that were very stylized because they were supposed to be like the manifestation of these waves or whatever the heck it was, right? As a conceptually, the movie was beautiful. Aesthetically, artistically, it was beautiful. I really enjoyed the message of it, I think, as well. But you're right. I think it was kind of more up here in the head than down here. So good, right? Not maybe as classic or as timeless as like a Toy Story or something, but still it's
Wall-E.
solid. Or Wall-E, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
Which,
still
I mean,
worth
who doesn't
watching.
love Wall-E? Come on, Wall-E. Oh my gosh.
Wall-E.
Oh. I love him.
But good. I mean, more like if you want to kind of rank the Pixar movies, it's more probably in the realm of the dinosaur movie, right? Than right, not top tier Pixar, but again, Pixar has never put out a clunker except for maybe Cars 2 or whatever.
Planes.
Yeah. So like solid, really solid movie, worth rewatching, worth definitely watching at least once. I don't know that it's like top tier Pixar though, and that's fine.
I think that's a good way to put it. So I think, looking at this movie, maybe the most obvious place to start is kind of like the biggest theme that emerges in this, right? And that's really kind of like this idea of Joe being a man who is kind of hell-bent on living into what he believes the purpose of his life is, which is to be a jazz musician. But then they kind of they bring in this new idea, and like with these, preborn souls or whatever, and it's only a little heresy. It was like heresy light. It was it's like kind of harmless heresy.
Paging origin.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt that bad. Like, definitely can mess with like the understanding of the human being and what a human being is and does, but not that bad.
It's bad. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it, but again, it's a Pixar movie.
It's not Docetism.
That's fair. If you were going to rank heresies,
that's what I'm saying.
It's not top tier heresy.
Not top tier. Much like the movie Soul, which is not
it's a solid heresy.
Pixar.
It's a solid heresy.
It's just like mid-management heresy, mid-management Pixar.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the guy at work that like everyone kind of tolerates, but like you go, he's kind of annoying, and like, the workplace would probably be less hostile without him, but it's not like he's really doing any. He's just old, like he's an old dude, and like he's gonna say things that are a little racist from time to time, and everyone's like, okay, I get it, like
a little cranky.
You can't change him. Yeah, you can't. It's like grandma. You can't change grandma. I don't know what are we talking about.
You've unveiled something in your heart. That's what just happened.
Can we keep talking about family stuff? But anyway, so they bring in this new idea with the souls that are yet to come down to earth, and it's the idea of like what they call a spark.
Yeah.
And Joe, in the beginning of it, kind of once he's in this, the great before, conflates purpose and spark. And I think that it's really interesting to kind of like talk about those things kind of in the movie and how they play out, because it seems to me that purpose is, for Joe anyway, and really I think kind of in the framework of the movie, purpose becomes the thing that like is about finding what gives your life meaning, right? Like,
Yeah.
like if you, without purpose, life has no meaning. And if Joe cannot actualize his significance as a jazz musician, which is his purpose, then his life is therefore like kind of drab and meaningless. It's
Yes.
kind of like what you're intended to believe. Like, oh, he has to become a musician. Oh my gosh, he has to. If he doesn't, then what the heck? You know?
Yes. 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 Right. And I think like a way to think about this, it's the difference between the thing that you do and the person that you are. Right. Because I think this is the reason that Joe conflates this. Like he says, like the reason that I was put on this earth is to play jazz music. And he does it. He lives up to his purpose. He plays with this, like this amazing quartet. He has an amazing performance, and yet it comes up hollow for him. Like it's still very flat. And then he has that epiphany when the leaf from the oak tree or whatever it is like falls into his hand, and he realized that what he previously dismissed as plain old living actually is living. I think this is it's a powerful message, because like so much of the way, and this comes from religious circles too, right? So much of like the way that we talk about life is around purpose-driven life, right? Like there's this thing that you have to accomplish or this thing that you have to do, but it kind of eliminates the beauty of simple existence, right? Like gratitude in the moment, relationality in the moment, like a powerful contrast between the two of them, which I watched the movie twice. I watched it on New Year's Eve, and then I watched it last night. When Joe goes into the hall of him, right, and he has these little vignettes from his life, that's when he has this realization, right, that like my life is empty, because you see him sitting alone at in a booth in a diner eating pie. You see him like teaching middle school kids. Like all of this like rings a failure to him, and yet when he reorients his life away from purpose to what actual spark is, you go back and you see him like eating the pecan pie in the booth at the restaurant and like savoring it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's no longer like a loser who's eating by himself and is a failed musician. Like it's a moment of beauty in a well-lived life. Teaching these middle school kids is not like the plan B because he was a failure at being like, he's teaching these kids and imparting beauty and living, right? Even the same things that came across as failures when he looked at them through the lens of purpose were actually like the successes, the sum total of like a life that had beautiful small moments, like that was full of spark.
Yeah. As we're talking about this, like I'm thinking through, so in Andy Roots, who we love, in his last I don't know if it is his most recent book anymore. The dude comes out with a book every like 3 minutes. So it's like, True. It's hard to keep track of which one's which.
Very true.
He wrote this really great book called The End of Youth Ministry. I said that like that because it has a question mark in the title. So it says The End of Youth Ministry ? Why parents don't really care about youth groups and what youth workers should do about it. And it's a very interesting book, and it's a good read. What he kind of presents is he's like, he goes and he interviews like 3 sets of parents in the thing, and what they kind of get stuck on talking about is helping their kids find their thing. Like we need to help them find their thing. And like, like we tried hockey and like that wasn't their thing. We tried basketball and that really wasn't their thing, but dance kind of became their thing. And so we're going all in on the dance, and like, but the way that Andy talks about it is he's like, we've kind of made these things like goods that we chase after, goods that we use in order to procure what he calls the super good, which is happiness. Yeah. Like if we can do this and fulfill kind of like our thing and do our thing, which for Joe is being a jazz musician, which is what he thinks his purpose is, right?
Yeah.
If he can do that thing, then he'll attain to the ultimate super good, which is happiness. But what he ends up saying is that happiness isn't a bad thing. Like it's not bad to feel happy. Like he's certainly happy when he plays on stage with the quartet, and it's a great show and it's a whatever. But when he comes out of there and starts thinking like, is my life going to be about playing this over and over again? Like that's what my life is about. Like then all of a sudden existence feels flat.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, that is, holy cow, not it. But rather, if we're rather than chasing the super good of happiness, if we are to desire the good, capital G, we begin to see that the good is actually the person of Jesus Christ, and that participating in Jesus Christ is the good, and like the only thing that should be our thing is him, right? Yeah. And it's not even about happiness at that point. It becomes about this joy of participation in the cross of Christ in the world, right? So, and then you begin to see that's where Joe like goes and sacrifices his own life, right? Taking up his own cross, and participating in 22's salvation, right? For lack of a better way of putting it. 22, when she's in the body, like she begins experiencing all of these things, and her heart is drawn into to other people. And that's the joy. Like, remember when, what's the girl who plays the trombone? Is her name Connie?
Oh yeah. In the class, in Joe's music class. Yeah.
But then she comes to his apartment and she's like, I hate the trombone. I'm going to quit the trombone. And like 22 is like, all right, it sucks. Right.
Yeah.
And she's like,
yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't like,
it's not that bad.
Yeah. It's not that bad, but like, maybe I could play a little something for you, I guess, if you really want to. And then she pulls it out and it's like this great thing. And like 22 is like swept into this moment of watching her, right, participate in, I guess, like when she's in the zone, like when as they're talking about kind of like at one point they see all the souls who are like in the zone or whatever they call it. Is it called in the zone?
It's the zone.
Refer to it. Yeah, they're in the zone where they are doing the thing on earth, but they're kind of like brought into some sort of like, transcendent place of the soul. And she goes there, and 22 is inspired by that. And like that to me kind of becomes like, oh, that's the thing that we're chasing after, is like actually the good of participating in that which is beyond ourselves, rather than keeping our heads so like bent down to like getting the thing that we want, which whether it's getting into the college that we want, getting the career that we want, because we'll always find that something is lacking. And he even talks about this too. He's like, there's a difference between the mom who gets a call on Christmas morning saying, like, to find out that her son is being released from prison, right? And the person who gets a Lexus for Christmas after really wanting one for a long time. So he's like, there's something that we're bound into a narrative of cross and resurrection with the mom who gets a call that like her son's being released from prison, versus like, the story about the Lexus is like, why are you so happy to have a Lexus? It's like, well, because I've always wanted one. Yeah. It's like, but why? Yeah. Well, because I think they're really great cars and they go fast and that's fun for me. And like all of a sudden the story just starts feeling flat, and then a month from now, it's like,
what happens after you get it?
It's just my car.
Yeah.
And but the joy that comes from the son being released is so much greater and like has an eternal quality to it. And it's just, I thought that was a really helpful way to kind of look at it and think about it,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that there's something beautiful that's baked into all of that too, is there's this relational component too. Like that's I think a thing that is beautiful. Like 22 finds her spark by sort of like, she finds this deeper participation by sharing that moment with Connie, right? It's kind of like the spark is almost this thing that is contagious, that comes from one person to another. Like it is a thing that comes out of a personal connection. Like I think it's no accident, right, that Joe is misinterpreting spark as like this purpose, like it's just me and jazz music, right, or it's just me and whatever this thing is. But even the way that the great before is structured, it's structured around like mentors, kind of leading and being guides for these souls to sort of not connect them with like the task that is appointed to them, but just to give them sort of like a spark for living, to kind of immerse them into an experience, right? Yeah.
There's like the idea that it's taught or it's caught, not
taught.
Right? Yeah.
And that's I think like that, and that's the beautiful thing about why it's so beautiful that Joe in particular is the one who's finally able to get through to 22, because like there's that I think you don't really see it until you go to 22's little cardboard box layer, because she mentions how Abraham Lincoln was her mentor for a while, right? And all these like really funny cutscenes, like Marie Antoinette was her mentor for a while. Mother Teresa was her mentor for a while and hated her apparently, right?
And it's so funny because they just drop that in every now and then, like these famous people like Rene Descartes.
And Carl's Jung, right? All these things. Yeah. And you go into her room and you see all of the name tags, right, from all of her mentors. And of course, there are all of these people that actually gave up on her and said bad things about her, right? But it is Joe, who is like a gifted pianist, but in the grand, like nobody's going to remember the name Joe Gardner. in the same way that you remember the name Mother Teresa, whatever it is. Like he has these very grand ideas about what purpose is, this thing that you uniquely were put on this earth to do, but it's really just like the zest for life. It's this desire to, if we think about it from a Christian point of view, like I can't help but see those moments where 22 is getting her spark and realizing it's just like this Eucharistic sort of living, this living with gratitude, right? This little sort of seed falls off of an oak tree, right? And she sees kind of the beauty of this moment and she's overwhelmed with a sense of gratitude. Like, thank you for placing me here. That's when she's ready to actually like live on earth, when she's able to be placed in earth, not as a burden, as a thing that she sort of freely chooses and is actually grateful for the opportunity of being in this place with this person.
Right.
Like that's when spark opens up, right? It's not the thing you go to do in this abstract sort of way, and you need this world historical figure to teach it to you. You need Mother Teresa, you need whatever. It's just like Joe, who actually turns out really enjoyed living, is going to show you that like life is worth living and it's beautiful and thank God for it.
Yeah. And that becomes it. It's just like our participation in what is here. Right. And like that kind of, because otherwise, and this is where the really interesting concept of the lost souls comes into this, right?
Yeah.
Is that like they're lost souls who are people are like, they get so fixated on a thing that like, that's all that their life kind of becomes about. And they're shrouded in this like dark cloud in the, you know, in the astral plane and all of this kind of stuff. And it's so interesting. Like, just cause you see their souls and they're like, got to make the deal, 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 got to make a deal, got to make the deal. And they need to be freed. They need to be freed from kind of like being these lost souls. And they become so consumed with whatever the thing is, whether it's, you know, searching for like change in the beach or whatever it might be. There's a hedge fund manager, which I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Watching
a lot
him.
of more hedge fund managers. A lot of more hedge fund managers.
Yeah. And also he's like, oh, another hedge fund manager.
Yeah.
That was it. Also, Moonwink is, I think, one of the most incredible characters ever put in a movie of all time. I love
the sign twirler.
Like, oh my gosh, so good. It's so good for so many reasons. Like there's so much to be said about Moonwink alone. But anyway, you know, then there's a moment where, oh, you know what? Actually, I take it back. So that might have been the one moment that I got a little emotional in the movie was when they freed the hedge fund manager. Because like, and when they free him from being this lost soul, and he kind of like comes to himself, and he's like, "What am I doing? I'm not happy. Like I don't like why don't?" And he just like throws the computers to the side, and he's like it's, I forget what he says, but like, I'm free. There's like
life is beautiful.
Life, yeah, exactly. He's like, wake up, everybody. Like it's something. He's this kind of almost like born again, you know, human. And it was.
I like that his first instinct is not to just tear down his monitor, but he goes to his neighbor and he tears down his neighbor's monitor too. Right? It's like, you don't need to be here. Life is so much better than this.
There's more to it than making money. Yeah. And I thought like that was a really cool idea. So the lost soul thing is fascinating, because I think it isn't until about 2/3 into the movie that you realize that Joe's a lost soul.
Yes.
But it's never explicitly said, but there's that moment, right, when 22 in Joe's body goes to get his hair cut.
Yeah.
And 22, who's free, has this conversation with the barber and is like asking all these questions and saying all these amazing things, and people who are listening. And you know, the one guy who was the critic of him, who's like, Joe, da, da, da. You know who played him?
No.
It was David Diggs, who also was the guy who played Thomas Jefferson and Lafayette and Hamilton, which I thought was really fun.
Oh,
yeah, that's fun. But anyway, you know, when he leaves, like the barber says to him, he's like, Joe, it's really nice to talk to you about something besides music, you know? And I forget exactly how it gets to the point where he's like, it was like nice to kind of tell you about myself. And he's like, why didn't you ever tell me before? And he's like, well, you never asked.
Yeah.
And you begin kind of realizing like, oh, he's been so just like bent in on himself and his purpose that he like, this has become the thing that he's lost his soul over. When am I going to make it? 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 That it's just heartbreaking, right? Because you realize that like there's life outside of yourself. And, you know, St. Silouan says, my brother is my life. And in that moment, Joe experiences that. He's freed from his body and his life, and he gets to actually watch it like as an outside observer in the form of a cat.
Yeah.
Which is wild because he gets to see how people engage him and how they talk to him and treat him. Which I think is, we do this, I think, to young people from a very, very early age too, of kind of setting them up for this. Where, like, I remember one of the first questions that we were asked in kindergarten was like, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yes.
Right. Like, or what do you want to do when you grow up? And even if we ask people now too, what do you do?
That's the first question when you meet somebody new, right?
What do you do? And really, what is the actual question that's being asked? Is it really, what do you do?
How do you make money?
How do you make money? That's exactly what that question means. Because if I was to be like, well, I play with my kids, I read books, I write bad poetry sometimes, I sometimes eat too much, I like these are the things that I do, and this is part of what it means for me to be human. But if you want to know how I pay my bills, like, I do XYZ. But it's a really weird thing that, like, that's how we tend to approach these things, is based on the perspective of like our performative roles and contributing to the economy. Like that is what it means to be human by way of, modern American standards. Like, how do you make money? How do you contribute to the system?
Yes, 100%. And it's such a flat, like, grinding view of what it is to be a human, right?
Yep.
But it becomes this all-consuming thing too, because of course, like, people feel like they're working harder, they're not paying bills. Like, it's actually becoming, the more we focus on this and the more that we think of ourselves through this lens, the more oppressive the system actually feels like for the people who are stuck in it. But Joe is given this amazing gift, right? Because he is so incapable of thinking. He's so incapable of seeing the world through the eyes of another human being. He's so incapable of seeing the world outside of the lens of this particular purpose. Like, it takes the gift of literally being freed from himself to be able to see this, right? Because he sees 22 being a better Joe, if you think about it, right? Like, the Joe that sits in that chair is a way better Joe than the Joe that normally sits in that chair. Yes. And how humbling and embarrassing and convicting that is, right? To see people like the version of you that isn't really you. But then of course it becomes a challenge, because the only thing that stops Joe from being that kind of person is his slavery to his, like, purpose-driven life. Right? The Joe that walks out onto his porch.
Not the registered trademark purpose-driven life. We're not talking about the Rick Warren registered trademark.
Yeah. No. Although, again, Andy Root, right?
But maybe not. Maybe not too.
Well, no, I think like Andy Root, because I follow on Twitter too. Again, we both love Andy. He's great. Look up to him a lot. I think he saw the movie on like Christmas Day or the day after. So he tweeted his thoughts like very early on before I watched it. And he was drawing this contrast between the way that, again, sometimes even Christians will think about purpose that, right? Versus this. And what purpose is for Joe is slavery.
Yes.
It's this thing that actually causes him to lose sight of who he is. It's a thing that causes him to ignore the people around him. It's like so all-consuming thing, and of course, it's worthless at the end of the day. Because like the purpose, actually, he's so consumed by purpose that he has no space for empathy or interest in anything else. Like the fact that he sees this guy and he projects, right? Which is really funny. I think about that barbershop interaction. He projects his own broken view of the world onto the barber. Like that's a man who was born to cut hair, right?
Oh yeah,
that's a man who he loves jazz, because we talk about it all the time.
That's right.
That's a man who's born to cut hair. He's so good at it. He's what he does. And then like it turns out the barber wanted to be a veterinarian, and he was in the Navy, and like he couldn't pay his bills, and barber school was cheaper, right? And like he's not born to cut hair, but he's happy doing it.
Yeah.
Not for the sake of cutting hair, but because he gets to help people and listen to people. And like even his, like Joe's understanding of cutting hair is this very mechanical, purpose-driven thing. Whereas the barber, and forgive me, I forget his name, his understanding of cutting hair is this relational thing. Like you sit in the chair, I get to know you. I get to hear the stories of all these wonderful, weird people, right? Like his day is full of multiple sparks of these guys who come in and tell stories and tell jokes and share how they're feeling. Like that's why he likes cutting hair. And I think it's the genius of making a barbershop be the sort of like the atmosphere and the environment in which this aha moment happens, right? Because It's like bars and barbershops are like these two places where therapy happens, like in the real world, right? Like you tell your barber everything, you tell your bartender everything. I mean, clearly, like even if it's a more grown up than most Pixar movies, it makes sense that they did it in a barbershop rather than in a bar.
Right.
But like, I don't know. I think it's a lovely, this forced empathy that begins to break Joe's addiction to his purpose.
Himself. Yeah,
to
his
himself.
purpose and whatever the false self stuff, right?
Yeah.
And which is often, I think, kind of where the age of authenticity stuff that we love to talk about kind of comes in. And I do feel like there is like that kind of Christian kind of language that we can put on this of like vocation or calling. We may not be like purpose, like, because our purpose obviously is to glorify God, but how do we do that? And we got to find out how we're going to do that. We got to find the right vocation. Yeah, exactly. Whereas, what you begin to realize is, again, like St. Silouan says, my brother is my life. Like when you have a spark for living, regardless of what your how your living is manifested, like the how of your living or the what, maybe, I don't know. Am I making sense? Like the kind of like if you have a spark for life, then you actually are free to do anything.
Yes.
Right? Like, because that spark for life always brings you toward other people. And it's by sharing in others that I think that we do find like where true joy is. Happiness isn't in, obtaining to these goods that lead us to the super good of happiness.
Yeah.
Joy is in other people, and life is found in other people. My brother is my life. And so the more we have that kind of understanding of relationality, spark can be anywhere. It can be, as a failed veterinarian student I guess he didn't really fail, but as a veterinarian student who didn't get to do the thing and had to go become a barber, like there can still be life and joy there.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe I'm not getting to do the thing that I want to do, but like I'm joyful.
Yes.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to know you, and I'm glad to hear cool stories about cool people, and all of this kind of stuff, which I think is really, really powerful, right? That
totally,
you can see even how, if we're doing the opposite of the thing, like if we're so stuck in the purpose, it is so it's so destructive to other people, right? Where you see Joe and his like sharpness with 22, you see Joe and how he treats Connie when she comes to the door. He's like, get rid of her, right?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the thing that like he wants to do, because he needs to go fill in the blank, get to do whatever he needs to do to get ready for the show.
And that's all that matters. And if something gets in the way of that, or a person gets in the way of that, to the side.
Yeah. And I resonate with that on a personal level, like as someone who works from home, like I can get so wrapped up in what I do that sometimes I can't just be with my kids. Like it's hard for me to like leave work, because work, like is here, and like my children are out there, they're not here right now. But I can get so upset in some ways, like with them getting in the way, like there's that idea of them, like other people being in the way.
Yes.
That I fail to see that I'm missing out on my life. Like I've lost my spark in that case. Like I gotta do this, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, like there's things that need to get done.
Sure.
But it's different to recognize that, and to somehow think that I'm deriving meaning in life from doing those things.
Yes. This is something that Father Andrew Damick has shared before. It's actually advice that he got from his spiritual father, Father Theodore Petrides, who I think you know Father Theodore, right? Through like,
yes. Well, I don't know if I've ever met him. I know his son.
Yeah. He once told Father Andrew, and Father Andrew has shared this multiple times, right? That like, you think about the people in your life, they're not in the way, they are the way. Right. And that like, this is what real life actually is. It is in those moments. It is in the sacrifices we make for people, the interactions we make for people. And I mean, it's joyous and it's liberating. And I think about this in terms of like the grand sweep of history. There's like, there's a 20th.
You were about to say the grand squeeze. Were you going to say the grand squeeze of history? Because
I'm a
little
like thirsty. I could use some lemonade. Yeah. The grand squeeze of history. There's a 20th century, a little bit tart, right? You got to add sugar.
Well, I mean, it's also like, it's just gradually draining the life out of all of us.
There's that wonderful line that Tina Fey's character has because she plays 22, right? What is it that you have to like, you lose your will to live or life beats something out of you. And she's like, no, you have to go to Earth for that. Like there's very like existentially dark moments in the movie. But there's a 20th century philosopher, Martin Heidegger, and he's kind of very famous for this like concept of Dasein, and like the being of a being is being a being, which is delightfully fun to say in English, right? That like what it is to be a being is just like living, is being a being, right? It's funny. It took Western philosophy till the 20th century to be able to articulate something like that, whereas like the church, right, for much longer than that, has had this deeply like existential, this deeply sort of like relational understanding of what it is to be in the world, right? Because what it is to be a Christian, what it is to be a human being, is in connection like loving God, loving neighbor, right? Like that is that is what the core of what the law is: love God, love neighbor. You know, God's not in the way, your neighbor's not in the way. God is the way. I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? And the people in your life are actually sort of like parts of that on the way. And it's funny to me because like the message behind a movie like this, which is like a 20th century philosophical breakthrough, is like has been so core to us as Christians for so long. And it's a funny little example of how like Christians have been ahead of the curve when it comes to a lot of these things, but it's weird, right? Because that's not what mainstream Christianity is known for. Like mainstream Christianity, which is kind of deviated from that, is much more purpose than spark.
Yes.
And like,
and also us versus them, right? Like that kind of like communion of being that you're talking about. You know, I think of a lot of like the early fathers, and I want to say that it was Saint Simeon, the new theologian, even, who said that like, you know, when you look at someone who's hungry on the street, like it is your flesh that's hungry. Like you are it's the same flesh. It's not maybe it's a different instantiation of that flesh, but it's the same flesh. Like that is your flesh that is hungry. And so when Christ tells us, you know, to love your neighbor as yourself, he's telling us again, love your neighbor who is yourself. Like you are bound to them. You are one with them. In the same way that, you know, Saint Athanasius, he talks about when Christ dies in the flesh, that the reason and comes to dwell in the flesh, the reason this is so powerful is because the solidarity of humankind is such that the divine word of God could dwell in one human body, and it could touch and permeate the entire human race. You know, like that's the solidarity of humankind. And yet we're like, well,
this is the failure of contemporary Christianity, right? Because when people hear that concept, they hear Ubuntu, right? Like they hear kind of like an African proverb that's like Ubuntu, right? I am who I am because you are who you are, right? Like when people in 21st century America think of these like cosmic sort of like they hear brotherhood of man coming from like the international workers movement, right? They hear like Ubuntu coming from an African proverb. Like it is so funny how we as Christians, as American Christians, have so dropped the ball on like who we are and our calling in this world, that other non-Christian sources have sort of like stepped into the gap and said kind of like permutations of this, right? Like this kind of existential, my brother is my life, you don't get from contemporary Christianity. You get it from political movements or whatever it is. And that's baffling to me.
I was reading Mother Saint Maria Skopsova's. I've been reading her biography, and I love her. I love her so much. I feel like I'm like, I found a friend. I feel like I feel like I'm reading a friend. And like a deep personal connection with her, I feel. And I just like her a lot. But she, at one point, like with all of like the care for other people and kind of like actually standing in their place, giving up her own bed so that so that people have places to sleep, things like that, doing stuff like that, right? Because that she stands in solidarity with humankind. That at some points she's like, people are getting pissed at her and calling her like a socialist and calling her a communist, and like she's like, what a world where like I'm too left for church people and too churchy for the left. Like it's just very, like very, very baffling for me.
Yeah, it's the weird way that Christianity has always been this thing that is like out of time and out of place, right? I mean, it's always been a thing that kind of like challenges the culture. And yet, like, I think that's one of our challenges as contemporary Christians today, where like other people are actually giving kind of like a watered down version of this and filling in the gaps that Christians should have. Because again, like this message behind soul, right, is I think a challenge to the way that we tend to think of like. I'll give it another example, or maybe thinking about this from a different angle. If you look at like the way the pagan world reacted to the rise of Christianity, pagans changed their ethics to try to like imitate Christians. None of us would want to live in the pagan world of like the early, the Roman Empire, where they killed babies and had slaves and did all sorts of terrible things. Like, the Roman army would decimate 1 in 10 men. I mean, it was a brutal, bloodthirsty world.
Because none of that's happening right now.
So that's what I want to get to, right? Because so Christians come in and Christians are like, love thy neighbor and take care of the least among these, right? And pagan ethics began to change because people were being drawn to Christianity, because that's where love was, that's where kindness was, right? And so pagans tried to change their ethics, but it failed because Christianity was full of saints. Like you couldn't fake these ethics if you were seeing them in real life. And yet, what are we happening today? Contemporary Christians are so like us versus them, so like angry, so whatever. Pagans are once again like imitating Christian ethics, but doing a far better job of attracting people. Because when they think like when young people in particular, like, where do I find love in this world? A lot of them will say, I don't see it in the church. I see it in my local community soup kitchen that's taking care of people. Where do I see this sense of like connection to something bigger than I am, and not just this like economic understanding of humanity that my only value in the world comes from what I do and how I connect with the world? Again, people like see it outside of American Christianity in other things.
Right.
So it's weird. Like when pagans tried to co-opt Christian ethics in the 2nd and 3rd century, it didn't work. But here we are, like pagans, if I can use that word, right? Non-Christians trying to co-opt Christian ethics. And it's working because Christians aren't living up to Christian ethics, because we're living about purpose. We're living about me, as opposed to spark and us and like this deeper connection in the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's definitely something that, is, I think, much to our shame, for sure. We kind of accept the terms of dualism in a lot of ways, like that kind of like as long as kind of we're looking out for our own spirits, souls, then that's kind of all that really matters. Like we're like one day we're going to go to heaven and kind of like leave this world behind. And I mean, that was the world that I lived in a lot, when I was an evangelical Christian, was like that the real world didn't really matter all that much, and kind of like our place in it and what we did with our bodies and what we did with, except for having premarital sex, that you didn't want to do because it damaged your soul. Right. And that was kind of like the thing, like that was going to ultimately hurt your soul, not because the body really mattered all that much in that sense, but it was, I don't know. It was a weird thing.
Yeah.
But I feel like this movie too, like brings those questions, I think, into a really interesting tension as well, of like, what is the relationship between the soul and the body?
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, like they exist separately.
Yes.
Right. Like you
are your soul.
Yeah.
Right. Like, because it's your soul that goes to the great beyond, right? There's no resurrection of the dead in this movie.
Yeah. But also not, right.
Yes.
Because like Joe's body seems to have its own kind of way of knowing as well. Which I mean, I think is actually fairly accurate to kind of like things that we know, right? That the body does have its way of knowing, and it has a way of kind of like keeping track of things and all of this. Like that's a lot of like what kind of like trauma research is about too, that like the body stores information, which is wild, right? But again, that like illuminates the fact that there's a connection between mind and body that we don't understand fully. That like knowledge doesn't just exist here, and like the body isn't just for eating and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, so there is that interesting moment where 22 suddenly also finds herself liking the things that Joe likes, or like
Yeah,
I mean,
because
who
she's in
wouldn't
his
like
body.
pizza? Right, right, right. So I don't know. It was it was an interesting kind of thought experiment, I guess, of like, well, what would it be like if you could transplant souls? Like, how would that go? You know, and what I don't know.
Yeah.
How do we measure the impact of being a body um in the soul, you know? I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, that I like that. I think because yeah, again, it's a movie, right? It's not like a theological treatise. So on the one hand, great beyond, it's just the soul, but on the other hand, like that fact suggests that like something of Joe is in his body, right? Like his tastes, his likes, something of his personality even is in his body. And like as Christians who approach the world as like you as a human, right? Like who is it? It's Florovsky, I think, who's like, you're not just a body with a soul. You're not just a soul in a body, but we're both, right? Like it's not just we're not just like corpses that are walking around with souls in us, and we're not just like souls that are walking around in like meat suits. To be a human being is both. And I think like it's interesting, right? Because like we look for the resurrection of the dead. We have this sense that like that matter matters, and like it's even because we sometimes internalize some of these like
It's
dualistic
the
lessons.
grand squeeze, you know. What did you call it? The interpolate.
Yeah. We internalize a lot of those like dualistic sort of negative lessons. And we say like the body doesn't matter. We say like the world doesn't matter, but it does. I mean, the like as priests of creation, right? Like not only do our bodies matter, and like this is the body that is going to be risen again on the last day, but it's also like the world, like the world is placed into our hands so that it can be lifted up, not so that it can be treated like a disposable paper face mask.
Yeah, no, which I think is definitely, you know, not not true. But what's interesting, and this is where I feel like the movie is really curious, because on the one hand, it's like it's super dualistic, right? Like it's super very much like you are your soul, in the end you go away and it's fine.
Yeah.
And like that's what makes you you. On the other hand, like it is clear that the soul, that the body has an impact on the soul. Like you can't get away from it, because like it helps to find like the thing that was missing for her was a body. Like that's why she had no spark, because she had never been embodied. And so like she starts to like get this taste for pizza and the creative order, and like all of this kind of stuff, right, that begin to make her love being human. Like as she experiences life, the flesh, like that's where she begins to find her spark. And there's something beautifully sacramental to it throughout the course, right? Like even when she's like in the subway and she's like listening to the guy play the music, she's moved, right? And she's holding this bagel, and like her, right, it's such a beautiful moment where she is brought to break bread with this guy, like as she is brought into his music, she needs to give him something, right? And like for
as a
us,
token of the fact that they're there together, right? Like she's there partaking at his table, and so it's this very like human instinct, like please partake of mine.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, in that moment, right, like this symbol of their shared humanity, both in music and in bread, like he literally becomes her companion, right? Which, because the word companion literally translated means one with whom bread is shared.
Yeah.
And like it is a insanely beautiful sacramental blink and you miss it kind of moment, where like here we are sharing in this bread. And like again, how beautiful it is, right, that that our Lord takes bread as his body, and makes us literally his companions, right, by breaking bread with us. And not only that, by breaking his own body for us, and like sharing that with us. So we become these deep companions, kind of this, taken out of his side as Eve was taken out of the side of Adam. We're companion and partner. It's like it's an incredible thing that again, like we maybe don't take enough time to really sink into, right? that like our companionship with Christ.
And it doesn't happen in a bodiless way. Like you can't be companions without the pan, right? The bread. That's a part of that. Like it's the unique calling of human beings in particular, right? Like it is humans who are both body and soul who get to fully participate. Like Jesus became incarnate as a human being, right? Which is apparently drove some of the angels to jealousy way back in the day. But like it's that the physicality of that actually becomes kind of like the locus for this like touch point, right? Even the phrase touch point, you can't touch without a sense. You can't touch without fingers. You can't hear music without ears. You can't play music without fingers, right? You can't taste bread.
How 22 is, right? Like when they're in the great before, she's like, everything here is a simulation.
Yeah. It's all conceptual.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's something very grounding about physicality, and physicality becomes this place where things can actually kind of like come together. We can eat together because there's a solid table at which we're all sitting. Right. Like the Son of God took on flesh, right? He became one of us. He's not united to the angels in the way that he is united to human beings. Like there's something like, and this is why I think it's so demonic to actually look down our noses at physicality, right? Because like it is in physicality that like God joins us, you know? And yes, it's dirty and it's smelly and whatever it is. And like, that's kind of part of the point. Because
he didn't stray away from that, right? Like he doesn't stay away from like the yucky parts of being human. Like he actually goes straight for him. Like when we're told that he goes to Bethany, right? Like literally that's translated as the house of the poor.
Yeah.
Like that's where he goes, like I'll go before you into Bethany.
Yeah.
like, okay, great. We'll see you there. See you there, dude. Often over and over again, he's going to Bethany. So, there's something I think to recognizing that like, yeah, human life is like that kind of dirty grossness and full of like these moments of transcendent beauty, that touch in and are not separate from, our just normal human life. Like this is going to sound like a weird kind of way of putting it, but like, like epiphany, right? Like when we talk about I had an epiphany, like a lot of times people have these epiphanies or really great thoughts while they're taking showers or going to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Right. There's like these moments of like breakthrough where you're like, I was thinking about this while I was, sitting on the toilet, and I thought it would be a great idea. Yeah. Or like you think of like Back to the Future when Doc Brown is hanging a clock on his toilet and slips because the porcelain's wet. Yeah. He hits his head and has a revelation of like the flux capacitor, right?
Yeah.
Like this is kind of how it happens. Like we have these aha moments, not because we're like trying really hard to do them or whatever, but they almost always catch us as we're just going about like normal life, kind of going, like, oh yeah, what if I, whatever,
because normal life is life.
Yes.
Right. It's that line that Joe has, like he dismisses it at first. Like that's not purpose. It's just regular old living. But regular old living is living. That's precisely the point. Right. And regular old living is what God enters into. Right. Yeah. Like the Son of God, like sits around a fire after he's resurrected. Right. He sits around a fire and he has a piece of broiled fish with his disciples. That's what he enters into. And it's in these small moments that like wonderful things happen. And I think we can be too,
Sorry. Go ahead. You finish.
No, and we can be too distracted by chasing something rather than by actually appreciating what is actually here and where God has planted us.
Yeah, and I think like this is maybe where I'm kind of tying the knot in my head with like the pandemic stuff, right? That like the number of times I've heard people kind of talk about like when things get back to normal, like when normal life did it normal, and it's like, wait a minute, wait. Like we're human beings. Like disease is normal life.
Yeah.
Like this actually is real normal life. Like life is not on pause from 2020. Like this is part of just living like the human life. And as long as like we see COVID and the pandemic as this thing that gets in the way of our pursuing goods that help us attain the super good, right, of happiness, then that makes it an enemy to life. But if we see it like actually as a place of like where we can encounter the good, Jesus Christ himself, like in like our neighbors, in like, you know, those who are suffering in reality right now, like COVID becomes a place where great joy is possible. You
Yeah.
know, it's no longer just this, and this is all that we have. Like if we're waiting for like the pandemic to go away, we're going to become lost souls. Like
Yeah.
it's just gonna, like, we just need to be able to get back to church like normal, 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 church like normal. Then like we become so consumed by those thoughts that like we're gonna be reckless and dangerous, and we're gonna, you know, we're gonna be missing out on like other things, you know,
Yeah.
instead of kind of being like, well, this is what it is. Like this is real, this is life, and what am I gonna do about it? Be pissed at a virus?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
stupid virus. Oh, go away. It doesn't
Shake my
care.
hands at you,
It doesn't
RNA.
care about what I say about it. It doesn't, it's like, I'm a virus. I don't have thoughts. I just do
Yeah.
things and hurt you. And like, that's what I'm for, is to like eat your cells and replicate mine. You know, like that's why I'm here. And like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how rude I was being, you know, like, I mean, I can't imagine, like, the virus is not polite. It doesn't care about you.
Yeah.
I don't think that means we need to be like afraid of it and to like go hide in your bunkers and, you know, hide your kids, hide your wives. But like, I do think that there's got to be a proper level of fear, in the sense of like respecting this thing, right? Like they're like
Not being
respect
reckless.
respect what's real. Yeah. Because it's
Yeah.
real.
Yeah.
You, like, respect it because it's real, not because it's like going to kill you.
Yeah.
It might not kill you. It probably won't kill you.
Yeah.
And it's real and will kill other people. But so like, I think like that to me is maybe where like the kind of like where the needle gets threaded for me, surrounding like why we've been like, oh, 2020 has been the worst year ever, you know?
Yeah. Well, that to even tighten that knot a little bit, right? Because Joe finally like sees other people when he gets out of like his particular purpose, right? And I think like I like that connection because yeah, for the great majority of us, the virus is not going to affect us, right?
Mhm.
And I think like sometimes we're so consumed to make it even more mundane, right? Like we want to be able to go and eat out at restaurants unimpeded, and the potential suffering of others that might come from this is like totally not on our radar. Like Joe is so sort of obsessed with jazz that he literally takes no time for human beings. And I think like we as modern American consumeristic cogs in this economic machine, whose first interaction with other people is to ask, how do you participate in the economic machine? Right? Get upset.
I'm actually going to start asking that to people. Hi, Christian, how do you participate in the economic machine?
Right? How
and
do
then
you...
they're going to be like, huh? And I'll be like, what do you do?
Oh, glad you asked.
Why are you
right?
important?
We so want to participate in the economic machine and get something out of the economic machine that like other people's interests get in the way, and that makes us like enrages us, right? I think that's a really interesting like connection here. If our brother was really our life, if spark rather than purpose was the way that we approached life, if we weren't lost souls that were so focused on what we wanted and what we did, like that would transform the way that we interacted with others in the world, and it would create room for joy, and it would create room for gratitude, and I think it would create room for the Spirit to actually like fill these moments rather than utility. Right.
And I think there'd be a lot fewer lost souls, you know, like you think about the people, like the lost souls, they have to be saved by other people. Right.
Yeah.
Like,
because they can't do it themselves.
They can't do it themselves. They're stuck. They're stuck inside. Even when 22 isn't, you know, when she becomes a lost soul, which is really, she's lost because of her shame. Right. Yeah. Like that's like the shame of like, I'm bad. Like I'm never going to be, I'm so bad and whatever, which
you have no purpose.
Another really interesting kind of dynamic to it, of like how she was just caught in the storm of her own shame. It was really sad, but
totally.
Like and I, you know, as a dad, like I can't help but wonder, like, do I do that stuff to my kids where they feel like, are, you know, like kind of lost as these like this small little soul inside who's like, I'm bad and I'm whatever, like, you know, and I know that what that means then is like, as a parent, like I need to go in through the darkness and find the thing, right? And find the soul and be like, no, like you are like loved and seen and valued. But Joe has to go in, he has to go into the storm. He has to confront her demons. He has to, and realize that actually he's one of them, right? Like that he needs to repent. Same too with, you know,
Yeah.
You know, we didn't talk enough about Moonwink, but like Moonwink and like the rest of the, you know, the like
The
spiritual
pirates.
folks who are, oh man,
The
so
hippie
good.
pirates. The hippie pirates.
The hippie pirates. Yeah. And they're all named like Moon and Sun and Star, like some sort of, it's so funny. Anyway, but like they have to go and rescue people. Like it can't be something that is done without them. And I think that's us, you know, like we have to go confront, and I mean, and by confront, I mean like lovingly. Well, we have to go find the lost souls by confronting the darkness that they're shrouded in, right? Like that's what we have to be brave enough to face, because the lost souls look scary.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, I'm scared of that thing.
Yeah.
Ugh. Right.
Yeah. These
But to be
tentacle
able to say,
arms
like,
and
oh, that's just a lost soul. That's not
Yeah.
like a, you know, fill in the blank. It's like, it's just a guy who's shrouded, who's been cut
Yeah.
off from life. Let's go into the darkness, you
Yeah.
know, together.
and own it, right? Because because 22's liberation happens because of Joe's repentance. He takes responsibility for leading her into that place of darkness. And I think this kind of takes us back to even the beginning, you know, our kind of preamble to today's podcast, right? That like there's a level of repentance, and there's a level of like, if my brother is my life, then like what have I done to lead my brother into the darkness as well? You know, as opposed to just pointing fingers. Like Joe admits that he was wrong about all of it, and he holds out the leaf, right? Like, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Like, you matter. And that is the thing that begins diffusing the shame and the anxiety and this death spiral that she was in. But sometimes we'd rather blame somebody else than actually take ownership of our own mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm sorry we didn't get to Moonwink because there was a lot, but yeah, we're at an hour and a half. We should wrap up right now.
I love Moonwink. Pop culture Moonwink hour.
Yeah.
So yeah, go see this movie. Watch it. It's definitely an interesting take on some of the questions, I think, you know, of meaning and purpose and spark and all of this kind of stuff that we talked about.
Yeah.
And you know, write to us, send us emails, whatever. Let us know what you thought. It's fun. It's fun to do this stuff. So shall we philanthropy corner it?
Yes. As we've been doing for a while now, we've been ending episodes of Pop Culture Coffee Hour by focusing on something good that's happening in the world. You know, people who are actually following through on My Brother Is My Life. So Christian, why don't you share with us something for today's Philanthropy Hour corner?
Yeah. So we today are we want to spotlight another podcast actually that is on Ancient Faith Radio called the Second Liturgy. The host of which is actually the editor of our podcasts, Mr. Tim Wenger, and he is wonderful and great and deeply concerned with issues of, you know, like justice and wealth and poverty, and kind of like how we should engage those things as Christians ourselves. And he's just got a bunch of episodes on there that are really inspiring, really helpful. In particular, there's this series of them that were done by a priest named Father Theophan Whitfield, I think is his last name. It's kind of off the tip of my head, but and he did this series of things called of lectures that are titled "The Servant Parish," and it's a very fascinating take, I think, on how we can maybe see how our churches can become places of service to the world, rather than just like the locations where we do service for the parish. So he asks, like, how can the parish itself become a servant to the world around and to the community around? And I found that those talks really, really interesting, really helpful, really encouraging. And, you know, Tim has done some awesome stuff. His son Thaniel is also involved in it, which is pretty cool. And they interviewed people, and it's just a great podcast that if you are looking for somewhere to kind of bolster your internal resolve or spirit or creativity or like think through things in a philanthropic way, I would point you toward the Second Liturgy podcast.
Totally.
Available on Ancient Faith Radio, probably also on Apple Podcasts or in the doobly-doo.
The link is down in the doobly-doo, as always, friends. Yeah, so that's good. Thank you, Tim. I mean, Tim, who's, you know, obviously helps us get this off the ground. That podcast, Wanderlust Coffee, Tim does a lot. He's got a good heart, and I think that really comes across in that podcast in particular. So check it out.
He's also a wily sorcerer who is somewhat eccentric and is not afraid to take on the, bunny rabbit with big, sharp, pointy teeth. There are some who call me Tim.
Nonsense on stilts, but that's good.
Yep. Well, it's been real. It's been fun. I'm gonna go practice some constitutional authoritarianism.
Have fun with that. Let me know how it goes.
I'm going to not invade my neighbor's home.
Yeah. If I can consensually participate in any way, you let me know.
Yeah. We have fun. We laugh.
We do. So next time, we'll be back in a couple of weeks. The girls, obviously, we alternate with the girls who are on the audio version. In particular, we'll be back with a live stream on Community. That's what we're going to be doing next week. So classic NBC sitcom Community. Cool. We'll do that in a couple of weeks. Until then.
Steve and Christian in the morning.
Nights. Later, guys.